The road into the Kiso Mountains does not hurry. It rises and falls beneath trees, bends around stone, and keeps much of the wider world out of sight. By the late Edo period, this inland route was known as the Nakasendō, one of the main roads between Kyoto and Edo. Travelers followed it for many reasons. Some moved under official obligation. Others carried goods, visited shrines, or simply continued toward another town. Near evening, the road feels less like a line across a map than a sequence of small, measured efforts. The approaching settlement offers no spectacle, only the practical relief of distance becoming briefly finite. The road asks for patience rather than speed, and each bend delays the moment when the next inhabited roof can be seen. By the time a traveler approached Tsumago-juku, hours had already been spent attending to the ground. The mountain path could be uneven, and every rise asked for another quiet adjustment of pace. Pack straps pressed against cloth. Sandals met packed soil, stone, and roots. Shelter needed no storm to become desirable. Ordinary fatigue was enough. Distance accumulated slowly in the body, and the long road could not be completed in a single day. Prints from the 19th century help preserve the visual language of this journey. Sloping roads, small figures, trees, bridges, and settlements appearing between folds of land. They are works of art rather than photographs, but they show that travel was experienced at walking speed. A town announced itself gradually. Roof lines appeared before rooms. A fence, a storehouse, or the darker shape of a gate could emerge before the street itself became clear. The approach to Tsumago belongs to this slow change from open road to inhabited space. The figures in these images are often small beside the land, which gives arrival the feeling of entering scale rather than conquering distance. The evening belongs to no famous traveler and to no single recorded date. It rests broadly in the late Edo period, when the culture and services of travel were already deeply established. First comes the mountain road, then the post town, then the separate buildings that received people, animals, and loads. The change is gentle. The path narrows into a street. Effort begins to ease, and the possibility of rest becomes part of the landscape. Tsumago was officially designated a post town in 1601. It became the 42nd of the 69 stations along the Nakasendo, a route of roughly 530 kilometers between Edo and Kyoto. The number gives Tsumago a clear place in a large system, but the system itself was made from local work. Roads needed bridges, resting points, animals, porters, food, lodging, and people who knew how to transfer responsibility from one station to the next. A post town was therefore both a settlement and a piece of infrastructure. Its usefulness came from many small duties being repeated reliably, rather than from any single grand institution. Every reliable handover depended on local knowledge, who was available, where a load belonged, and which stretch of road came next. By the early 19th century, travel in Japan had expanded well beyond the movements of high-ranking officials. Daimyo processions remained important, and the alternate attendance system had helped shape the road network. At the same time, merchants, farmers, pilgrims, and sightseers also used the highways. Guidebooks and travel journals circulated. Famous places could be imagined before they were reached. The road carried official hierarchy, private curiosity, religious purpose, and ordinary commerce together, although not always on equal terms. Different motives shared the same surface of earth and stone, passing through the same towns while carrying very different expectations. The Bunka and Bunsei eras, from 1804 to 1830, are associated with a strong expansion of travel. By the decades around 1820 to 1840, many habits and services of the road had become mature. Movement was never equally free or comfortable. Permission, money, status, weather, and health all mattered. Yet a busy culture of travel gave towns like Tsumago familiar ways to receive motion and turn it, for a few hours, into pause. Lodging was only one part of that function. A traveler might also need food, information, a replacement porter, a horse, or help directing a load onward. The post town gathered these needs close together, but no single house carried every duty. Responsibilities were distributed among families, offices, inns, shops, and service buildings. Tsumago was not one enormous inn. It was a town whose distinct spaces cooperated to keep the road moving. The preserved street of Tsumago still offers an unusually clear sense of wooden scale. Deep eaves project over narrow frontages. Upper stories lean close to the root. Doors, shutters, latticework, plaster, timber, and stone create a rhythm that can be read at walking pace. What survives today includes old fabric, repair, reconstruction, and conservation. It is not an untouched night from the 1830s. Even so, the scale remains legible. Shadow is not emptiness here, but the ordinary space between small areas of practical light. The street also shows how the boundary between public road and private interior could remain thin. A few steps might carry a traveler from the center of the route to a packed earth entrance. Goods could sit near a frontage. Voices from a workroom might be close to passing feet. The architecture did not seal every activity behind distant walls. Travel, trade, domestic labor, and hospitality met near the threshold, where dirt from the road encountered raised wooden floors. The threshold compressed several worlds into one shallow band: road dust, household order, exchange, waiting, and the first promise of shelter. Present-day views often show paper lanterns glowing along Tsumago after dusk. They offer a useful sense of proportion, though not a record of the exact lighting used on one Edo period evening. The historical night is better kept restrained. A little practical light near an entrance, a work surface, or a hearth, with much of the timber and street left in shadow. No uniform line of lanterns is needed. Local light is enough. As evening advances, the important change is not a sudden transformation, but a reduction. Fewer travelers continue along the road. Work close to the street becomes quieter. The forms of the town remain, but movement gathers into smaller areas. A doorway matters more than the full length of the route. A low interior glow matters more than the sky. The post town begins to feel less like a station among 69 and more like a collection of particular houses, each with its own place in the evening. Attention settles on nearer things: the grain of a post, the edge of a shutter, and the quiet depth beyond an open doorway. Not every traveler entered the same kind of lodging. The Onjin stood at the upper end of the hierarchy and received feudal lords, court nobles, and high-ranking shogunal officials. Rooms and circulation expressed rank through height, distance, and access. Tsumago's present Honjin was completed in 1995 as a reconstruction based on late Edo plans and comparison buildings. It does not erase the years between then and now, but it preserves a carefully studied model of how status could shape an evening indoors. The Waki Honjin, or secondary inn, could receive important guests of somewhat lower rank and could also support the Honjin when necessary. In Tsumago, the Hayashi family managed this role and combined it with other responsibilities, including safe brewing and participation in the post-town transport system. The current Waki Honjin building dates from 1877, after the Edo period. Its rooms preserve a later stage of local architectural and household tradition, not a transparent window into every detail of the 1820s. The family's work, therefore, joined hospitality, brewing, and transport duty, tying the household to several rhythms of the town at once. Most ordinary travelers would not have occupied the elevated rooms of the Honjin. Other lodgings served people of different status and means. The quiet evening, therefore, unfolds across several distinct places rather than inside one impossible building. The primary inn, the secondary inn, the horse and porter exchange, and the roadside tea house each carried a different function. Their boundaries make the town more credible, and also more varied. This separation also makes the town more interesting. The hierarchy of travel was not only a list of titles. It shaped doors, rooms, waiting places, routes through a building, and who could sit where. It influenced which family carried which obligation and which guest could expect which degree of privacy. The quiet of the post town was therefore structured. Even at rest, people occupied different positions within the same road system, and architecture made those positions legible without requiring loud display. A few steps, a raised edge, or a corridor could preserve that order long after voices had lowered for the evening. A post town did more than shelter travelers. It also helped move official people and loads onward. Along the Nakasendō, stations were obliged to provide horses and porters for government travel. In Tsumago, the families associated with the Honjin and Weki Honjin alternated responsibility for this service every 6 months. The arrangement linked private households to public duty. Readiness had to be maintained even when the road was quiet. The administrative system is therefore felt through pauses, bodies, and weight, rather than through a long explanation. The duty was public, but its weight rested on households, workers, animals, ropes, and the practical memory of the road. The exchange was supervised by a Tanya. An omasashi assigned horses and their handlers, while a ninsakusashi assigned porters. These titles can sound technical when listed together, but the work itself was physical and immediate. A load had to be understood. An animal had to be available. A person had to know the next stretch of road. Responsibility passed from one station's workers to another, and the journey continued through many such handovers. Each title marked a responsibility, yet the transfer still depended on ordinary attention to bodies, distance, balance, and time. At the exchange, administration became physical. A record could be checked, a rope adjusted, or a load lowered while the next stage was decided. The office was not a place of dramatic command. It was a point where movement became temporarily still so that it could be organized. Feet stopped. Weight rested on the ground. A few quiet decisions determined what would move again and who would carry it. By evening, some work could be complete while other obligations remained. The surviving account describes a prescribed reserve of horses and labor for official needs, though it does not preserve a minute-by-minute night roster for the selected decades. The obligation itself is enough to explain part of the town's calm. The road could appear still because people, animals, and responsibilities had already been placed where they could be found when needed. The threshold of a traveler's building often marked a change in material underfoot. A surviving roadside tea house near the Nakasendō, described as roughly 2 centuries old, preserves a packed earth floor beside raised wooden areas around an irori hearth and adjoining tatami rooms. It is a tea house rather than Tsumago's in itself, but it provides useful evidence for the spatial vocabulary of roadside hospitality. Dirt, timber, matting, and fire belong to different zones of use. Each surface quietly tells the traveler what may remain near the road and what belongs farther inside. The materials were not decorative layers. They organized dirt, warmth, privacy, and the changing posture expected from a person moving inward. Packed earth accepted the road. Sandals, loads, and the practical mess of arrival could remain closer to ground level. Raised wood separated the interior from that surface. Tatami established another kind of room, one that asked for controlled movement and a different posture. The transition might take only a few steps, yet it carried social meaning. A traveler did not simply enter a warm box. The building guided the body through a sequence of surfaces. The body understood the difference immediately, lowering its pace as hard ground gave way to cleaner and more controlled surfaces. The late Edo plan reconstructed at Tsumago's Honjin shows a more formal division. Family quarters and guest quarters occupied different sides, and important rooms were reached through controlled circulation. The building seen today is a reconstruction, Yet the plan supports a broader point. Hospitality could depend on carefully managed separation. Household work continued on one side while guests were received within an order shaped by rank and privacy. Near one end of the surviving roadside tea house, a stable once formed part of the structure. Its presence shows how closely shelter could remain connected to the animals and equipment that made travel possible. Walking, carrying, feeding, waiting, and resting did not belong to isolated worlds. Roadside buildings joined them within a short distance, allowing the journey to pause without losing its practical continuity. The Hayashi family also brewed sake, providing a steadier source of income than lodging fees alone. The surviving building dates from 1877, after the Edo period, and preserves a later arrangement in which inn work, brewery work, storage, and oversight occupied related areas. Its details belong to that later structure. Used with care, they reveal local continuity without turning the building into a perfect inventory of the 1820s. Within that later building, a former store for sake barrels stood near a position from which a head clerk monitored goods moving in and out. Brewery workers occupied space above. This arrangement makes supervision visible without requiring noise or spectacle. Containers, ledgers, doors, and stairs connected the household to a wider circulation of materials. The clerk's work depended on attention, noticing what entered, what left, and what still belonged in place. From that position, stillness itself could become a form of supervision, because order was measured by what remained correctly in place. The later arrangement suggests the quiet discipline of a mixed working house. Goods had to be accounted for. Storage had to remain orderly. A clerk's attention linked doors, containers, records, and stairs without requiring constant activity. Hospitality stood beside other forms of work that helped the family maintain its place in the town. The room could be calm precisely because order had already been established. As the street quieted, these objects did not lose their meaning. A barrel at rest still represented labor performed elsewhere. A written record could carry obligations into the next day. The room held traces of movement without replaying them. Containers, shelves, and ledgers could remain still while the wider system around them became understandable, slowly and without urgency. At the center of many traditional interiors was the orori, a sunken hearth set into the floor. A surviving roadside tea house places raised wood around such a hearth, while the later Tsumago-juku Honjin records a household seating order around its own orori. The buildings are separate, yet both show why the hearth could become the quiet center of a room. Heat, posture, work, and hierarchy gathered close to one modest source of warmth. A hearth gathers attention because its light is limited. It brightens hands and nearby timber while allowing the rest of the room to recede. The meal and conversation of any particular evening were not preserved in the record. What remains is simpler and more durable. People sharing controlled warmth, their positions shaped by household order, their distance from the work and from one another carrying meaning. The low fire changes the pace of observation. Ash settles around darker embers. A small adjustment has more consequence than a large gesture. The room need not be silent, but its sounds remain close. Timber may shift slightly as temperature changes. Cloth brushes a floor. A wooden structure answers the cooling night with an occasional creak. Nothing travels far enough to disturb the stillness. For a tired traveler, the orori would mark the difference between continuing and stopping. Yet the household around it did not exist only for the guest. Family routines, work obligations, and inherited rules shaped the room before any newcomer arrived. The hearth belongs to them first. The traveler enters an order already in progress, receives temporary warmth within it, and slowly becomes less separate from the stillness of the house. Temporary comfort did not erase the traveler's distance from home. but it allowed that distance to stop demanding attention for a while. The 1877 Wiki Honjin preserves another layer of the hearth's history. Smoke from a chimneyless orori darkened its cypress timber, and the same official account explains that the smoke helped keep the house dry. These observations belong to the later building rather than to a measured night in 1830. Even so, they show how care could be absorbed into the slow life of material, where heat, residue, and protection were not completely separate. Even with that caution, the evidence reveals a long relationship between fire and wood. Warmth was not cleanly separated from residue. Smoke entered surfaces. Timber changed color over time. The building recorded repeated use in a way that polished restoration can sometimes hide. A dark beam was not merely an aesthetic choice. It could be the result of many small fires, and many evenings in which the same room had to be made useful again. The same later building records women polishing wooden walls with small sacks filled with oi rice husks. The practice survives as evidence of continuity, rather than as a guaranteed scene from the selected decades. It gives care a quiet physical form. Pressure applied by hand, a surface slowly brightened, and maintenance repeated often enough to become part of the household's appearance. Warmth belonged to the people around the hearth. Residue belonged to the building that contained them. Soot, dryness, polish, and patient labor accumulated across many uses. Nothing happened suddenly. A wooden house remained habitable through repetition, and the marks of that repetition became part of what later generations were able to see. The reconstructed plan of Tsumago's Honjin shows how rank could shape a guest's path through a building. Its most important room, the Jodan Noma, had a floor raised above the adjoining space, an alcove, and a surrounding corridor. The present building is a 1995 reconstruction based on late Edo plans and comparison structures. Its value lies in making those planned relationships visible. Height, distance, and empty space could carry meaning before anyone spoke. A raised floor made status architectural. The distinction did not need to be announced repeatedly once it had been built into the room. The corridor created separation around the guest. The alcove organized one side of the interior. Movement became more controlled as a person approached the highest-ranking space. Such arrangements showed that rest was never socially neutral. Where a traveler slept or waited depended partly on who that traveler was. Quiet architecture could therefore maintain hierarchy without spectacle, using proportion and access where a louder setting might have used ceremony. The reconstructed late Edo layout also includes a front courtyard, understood primarily as a firebreak. This practical purpose matters. An opening in the plan was not only a stage for arrival or ceremony. In a town of wooden buildings, distance between flame and structure could become a form of protection. The quiet space of a courtyard, therefore, belonged to the safety of the house as much as to its appearance. A rear tatami room in the surviving roadside tea house contains a tokonoma and may have been used by higher-ranking travelers. The possibility remains a possibility, but even that cautious interpretation is revealing. Smaller roadside buildings could distinguish guests through room position and architectural detail. Across separate structures, rank entered the evening through floor height, access distance, and the arrangement of empty space. No single closing hour survives for every doorway in Tsumago during these decades. The street can become quieter without a formal curfew or a synchronized ritual. Activity moves inward. Fewer travelers continue after the day's effort. What remains visible is enough. A few wooden surfaces, a small area of light, and the memory of movement now reduced. The surviving scale of Tsumago shows how quickly darkness can gather around closely spaced wooden buildings once activity recedes. Current lanterns and modern closing patterns do not fix the details of an Edo period night, but the town scale remains instructive. Light is local. A doorway can be visible while an upper story disappears. A narrow street can hold a nearby glow within a much larger field of shadow. Inside, work does not need to end all at once. A household may still attend to an object, a surface, a record, or the hearth. The range of movement simply contracts. The horse exchange, road frontage, storage area, and guest rooms have each played their part. Now they remain present without asking for further explanation. The town's quiet is therefore layered rather than empty. Beyond one wall is the road that connects Kyoto and Edo. Beyond another is a household with obligations that will continue. Nearby are animals, goods, tools, and rooms whose uses differ by status. None of these must be activated for the final minutes. Their stillness carries enough history. The street becomes a container for systems at rest. A post town offered pause, not the end of travel. The Nakasendo continued in both directions, over passes and through other settlements, until the long route joined the political and cultural centers at either end. Tsumago's value came partly from its position within that chain. A traveler could stop because another section of road would begin later, and because the town had developed the people and spaces needed to make that interruption possible. Temporary shelter becomes meaningful because it preserves energy for a road that has not disappeared, only paused. Each station made the next one imaginable, turning a road of great length into a sequence of distances that could be endured. This evening is not preserved in a single diary. Its broad outlines come from the road, the hierarchy of lodging, the transport duties, the surviving plans, and the material practices left in the record. Names, meals, and small conversations remain unknown. Their absence leaves room for honest distance. The town can be understood without forcing every shadow to contain a story. Within that distance, the ordinary purpose of the town remains clear. Loads could be set down. Responsibility could pass between workers. A family could maintain a house whose rooms served both private life and public obligation. A traveler could move from packed earth to raised wood, and for a time, stop attending to every step of the road. Rest emerged from many forms of labor performed by other people. The still traveler was therefore supported by work already completed and by obligations that would continue after the room had grown quiet. Nothing dramatic arrives. The road remains outside. The fire has settled lower among the ash. Timber holds the marks of use, and the separated rooms keep their quiet order. By morning, movement will return, but morning is not yet here. For now, Tsumago-juku is one sheltered point along a much longer journey, and the traveler's only task is to remain still before the road continues.